Karen's betrayal cut deeper than any wound. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a stranger, someone who had once been full of life, of love, of endless potential. But all of that vanished the moment she pulled the trigger. The deafness that had defined her entire existence now seemed like a cruel irony as the silence in the room swallowed the final cries for mercy. Her expression was chilling, almost indifferent, as though she had made peace with what she'd done. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips, something so detached from the child I once knew. And in that moment, it became clear. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She wasn't just playing a game, this was something far darker. And as I stood there, staring at her in disbelief, I realized that the person I thought I knew had become a monster in the blink of an eye. Karen's arrival into the world was a mix of joy and uncertainty. We had known something was different from the start, but nothing could have prepared us for the depth of the challenges she would face. Emily, my wife, was the kind of woman who would bend over backward for our daughter. She believed that nothing should hold Karen back, not even her deafness. From the moment Karen was born, doctors told us she wouldn't have a typical life. She wouldn't speak, she wouldn't hear. But Emily refused to accept this fate for her. She worked tirelessly, getting Karen the best care, making sure she had access to the best speech therapy, and pushing for inclusion in every way possible. It wasn't easy. There were moments when we both wondered if we were doing enough, if we could ever reach Karen, who sometimes seemed lost in her own silence. But Karen, with her fierce determination, always pushed through. She took her first steps, and with time, she learned to communicate not just through sign language, but through the ways she expressed herself with her eyes, her gestures, and the rhythm of her life. She was extraordinary, overcoming every hurdle thrown her way. We were a team, me, Emily, and Karen. Emily kept our spirits high, constantly reminding us to focus on the possibilities, never the limitations. I was the quieter one, more reserved, but I had my own quiet confidence in Karen. Watching her adapt, watching her fight against the odds, made me proud, but I also knew there was something in her, something unspoken, that could never be fully explained. It was as if her disability had gifted her with a quiet intensity that could sometimes be unsettling. Despite all the triumphs, there was always a distance between us. Karen and I never had that effortless connection I shared with Emily. She was more distant, harder to read. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the weight of her own limitations, but also a quiet defiance, a refusal to let anyone see how much she hurt. And while Emily saw every little victory as proof of Karen's resilience, I often found myself wondering how long that defiance could last, how long it could hide the real pain Karen carried inside. Emily, on the other hand, never doubted Karen. She never saw the cracks. She believed in the beauty of her strength and would often say, "She's stronger than we'll ever know." But the truth is, there were moments when I saw Karen break, when the mask of confidence would slip, and I wondered what she was hiding. Emily never asked those questions. Maybe she couldn't see what I saw, the quiet desperation when Karen thought no one was looking. The turning point came when Karen met someone new, a friend from school, a girl who understood her struggle in ways no one else could, but something about this new connection changed her. It was subtle at first, just small shifts in her behavior, an increasing detachment, a new attitude that was darker than anything I had seen before. Emily saw it too, but she blamed it on adolescence, on the inevitable phase every parent faces. I wanted to believe her, to hold onto the hope that this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the years, I had watched Karen transform from the brave, determined girl who defied the odds into someone unrecognizable. The same intensity that had once been her strength now seemed to be consuming her. There were moments of anger, frustration, outbursts that cut deeper than words. I knew she was still struggling, but I couldn't get to her anymore. I couldn't break through the wall she had built around herself. The Karen I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone I couldn't reach. And then there was the day she changed forever. It wasn't just her actions, it was the look in her eyes, the coldness, the emptiness that I had never seen before. It was as if she had made a decision that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about her. And as that decision unfolded, as the truth began to reveal itself, I realized that the daughter I had fought so hard to protect and understand had chosen a path I couldn't follow. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there, but I was blinded by hope, by my love for her. But the truth is, Karen had already chosen her path, and nothing would bring her back from it. It started with small things, barely noticeable at first, little cracks that only became evident when the pieces began to shift. Karen had always been intense, her world built around silence and gestures, but lately, there was something different in the way she held herself. It wasn't the confident, determined Karen we had raised. This new version was quieter, more withdrawn, her eyes empty of the light that used to shine there. At first, Emily and I brushed it off as growing pains, the natural rebellion of adolescence. After all, Karen was 16 now, navigating her own space in the world, her own identity. But there were moments when her behavior was just off. I'd catch her staring at the wall, her eyes unfocused, like she was seeing something none of us could. She'd shake herself out of it when I asked, but there was always that fleeting moment of discomfort. I remember one afternoon, Emily and I were in the kitchen, talking about plans for the weekend, when Karen walked by without a word. Normally, she would have said something, anything, a comment on the weather, a request for a snack, even a silent sign. But she didn't. She just walked past us, her footsteps heavy, like she was carrying a burden that no one could understand. Emily shot me a concerned look, but I shrugged it off. She's just tired, I said, but even I didn't believe that. It wasn't just her silence, it was the way she started avoiding eye contact. I noticed it most during meals, when we would sit around the table as a family, trying to keep things normal. Emily would ask Karen how her day had been, but Karen's responses were curt, distant. Sometimes she'd answer in single words or not at all. And then there were the strange, unsettling glances. Whenever our eyes met, I saw something in Karen's gaze I hadn't seen before, a coldness, a distance, as though she was looking through me rather than at me. One night, after dinner, I walked into the living room to find Karen staring at a photograph of herself as a little girl. Her small hands clutched the frame, and her eyes, dark and distant, lingered on her younger self. There was something about the way she looked at it, almost with disdain. When I asked her if everything was okay, she just nodded and put the picture down without a word. The Karen I knew would have smiled at the memory, laughed, or made a joke about how goofy she looked. But this Karen? She just stared, lost in thought, before leaving the room without saying anything. Then came the night that shattered everything. Emily and I were sitting in bed, trying to unwind after a long day, when we heard a soft thud from down the hall. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe it was Karen getting something from the kitchen, or just moving around. But then we heard a voice, quiet, low, and unmistakably Karen's. Why should I care? I glanced at Emily, who was already sitting up, her face pale. Was that Karen? She whispered. I don't know. I said, my voice tight. I got out of bed and walked cautiously down the hallway, but when I reached Karen's door, it was closed. The faint voice I had heard had faded. But there was a tension in the air, like something had shifted. I knocked lightly. Karen. I called. Are you okay? No response. The silence that followed felt unnatural, unsettling. I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Karen was sitting on her bed, staring at the floor. When she looked up, her eyes were different, cold, almost calculating. The smile that spread across her face wasn't the kind of smile I was used to. It was thin and hard, like a mask. I'm fine, Dad, she said, her voice flat. There was no emotion in her words, just a robotic, almost eerie calm. Are you sure? We heard something. It's nothing, she interrupted, her tone sharp. Her eyes never left mine. I just needed some space. I nodded, my instincts telling me to leave, but something in the way she spoke made me hesitate. There was an edge to her words, a certain coldness that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but what? What could be so wrong that my daughter, the girl who had fought so hard to be heard, would suddenly shut me out like this? Emily and I decided to give her some space, but as the days passed, Karen's behavior grew more erratic. She began skipping school without explanation, coming home late, and acting as though everything we said to her was an inconvenience. One evening, I found her in the basement, sitting in the dark, her phone screen glowing. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't tell whether it was her mood or something else that made the space feel so oppressive. "What are you doing down here?" I asked, trying to mask my concern with casualness. "I'm just thinking," she said, her voice low. "About what?" I asked, stepping closer. "We're worried about you, Karen." She didn't answer immediately, but when she looked up at me, her eyes were different again, sharp, almost defiant. "Maybe you should stop worrying so much. I'm fine." And that was when I saw it, the photograph. It wasn't just a picture anymore. It was a symbol. I knew what it was. Emily had found the photos, the ones that had started to make sense of everything. Pictures of Karen with a new group of friends, her expressions darker, her demeanor colder. These weren't just photos, they were clues. Clues to something we hadn't wanted to see. The girl, who had once been so full of life, was slipping away. And whatever had taken her place wasn't the daughter I recognized. What had changed? What had Karen become? And more terrifyingly, who was she becoming now? Something had shifted deep inside her, and I had no idea how to stop it. The air was thick with an unsettling silence. Karen had been gone all day, her absence only deepening the knot of unease in my chest. Emily and I had tried to go on with our evening, pretending that everything was normal, but we both knew it wasn't. Not anymore. There was something so final in the way Karen had been slipping away from us, so final in the way she had become someone we didn't recognize. I had tried everything talking to her, pushing through her silence, pleading for the girl I once knew to come back. But tonight, I felt something inside me shift. I had to confront her. I had to know what was going on, what had turned her so cold, so distant. As I stood up to go look for her, the front door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect to see Karen standing in the doorway, holding something in her hand. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the dark, familiar shape of a gun clutched in her trembling fingers. She wasn't looking at me, not really. Her eyes were vacant, distant, and cold, as if she were somewhere far away. It wasn't the expression of a girl who was afraid. It was the look of someone who had made a choice, someone who had already crossed a line and wasn't looking back. She stood there, her posture rigid, as though she was ready for something to happen, something that would change everything. "Karen," I whispered, my voice shaking, "what are you doing?" She didn't respond. She just looked at the gun in her hand, her fingers tightening around it with an almost mechanical precision. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the rapid beating of my heart. "Put down," I said, my voice stronger this time, but even I could hear the desperation in it. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet mine, and there it was again, that look, that chilling, empty gaze. It was as though I were staring at a stranger, someone who had once been my daughter, but had somehow vanished without a trace. "I'm done, Dad," she said, her voice eerily calm, like she had already made peace with what was about to unfold. "I'm done trying to be someone I'm not." I could feel my pulse racing, my legs weakening beneath me. "Karen, you don't have to do this. Whatever's going on, we can fix it. We can help you. Just put the gun down, please." But she didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to hear me. Her eyes flicked toward Emily, who had stepped into the room, her face a mask of shock and fear. "Karen, honey, please. This isn't you," Emily said, her voice breaking. For a long moment, Karen didn't respond. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze back to me. "It's too late for that," she murmured, her words barely audible. Before I could react, she raised the gun. Time seemed to stretch, every second dragging out like an eternity. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening in my ears. I wanted to move, to scream, to do anything, but my body was frozen. And then it happened. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening in the confined space of the room. It wasn't me who felt the sting. It was Emily. I saw her stumble backward, her hand flying to her side, her face contorting in shock and pain. The world seemed to shift into slow motion as she collapsed to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Emily!" I screamed, rushing to her side. But Karen didn't move. She stood there, unmoving, her face expressionless, as though she were a spectator watching the destruction unfold before her. And then, just as I reached Emily, I saw it. The smirk. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. A slight curl of her lips, the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who had been watching a game, not from a daughter watching her family fall apart. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen hadn't just shot her mother, she had taken a part of me with her. I wasn't sure who this girl was anymore. This girl who once wore my heart on her sleeve, who used to hold my hand when things got tough. "Why, Karen?" I gasped, my voice thick with disbelief. "Why would you do this?" Her expression didn't change. She didn't seem sad. She didn't seem remorseful. If anything, she seemed satisfied. "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of pretending. Tired of living in your shadow, in her shadow." Karen's voice was steady now, her words cutting through the air like knives. "You never understood me. Neither of you did. You thought you could fix me. But I was already broken." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. And as I looked into her eyes, it hit me. Karen wasn't just angry at the world. She wasn't just angry at us. She was angry at herself for all the years spent fighting a battle she didn't know how to win. And now she had made a decision that had taken everything from us. I knelt beside Emily, clutching her hand, trying to stop the bleeding, but my mind couldn't stop spinning. Was this who Karen had always been? Had we missed the signs? Or had someone pushed her too far? But one thing was certain. The girl who had once been full of love, of hope, had now become something darker. Something we could never bring back. The ambulance arrived too late. The sound of sirens in the distance only made the silence heavier, more suffocating. By the time they reached Emily, I knew it was too late. There was no coming back from the look in her eyes, from the way her breath came in shallow, desperate gasps as she lay in my arms, her blood staining my shirt, her body growing colder with every passing second. I tried to hold on to her, to make her stay, but it was useless. My hands shook as I pressed them against her wound, feeling the life slip away from her like sand through my fingers. She whispered my name one last time, and I could barely hold back my tears. The woman I had loved, the woman who had fought so hard to give Karen a normal life, was slipping away, taken not by an accident, but by the hands of our own flesh and blood. "Don't go," I whispered through clenched teeth, my voice barely a sound, as though if I spoke too loudly, she might disappear completely. But Emily's gaze softened, just for a moment, as if she were giving me permission to let go. And then, with a final shaky breath, she was gone. The world fell silent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The room around me felt like a foreign place, the walls closing in on me, the weight of what had just happened too much to bear. But I had to keep going. I had to survive, if only to understand how we had come to this, to find the answers that would make sense of it all. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, my heart heavy with the crushing weight of grief and betrayal. And then I saw her, Karen. She was standing in the doorway, watching me, her face a mask of indifference. There was no guilt in her eyes, no regret, just that same coldness I had seen in her before. Her hands were empty now, the gun nowhere to be found, but the damage had already been done. The smile, the smirk, was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. "Karen, why?" I asked, my voice broken, a whisper of disbelief escaping my lips. "Why did you do this?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. She didn't even move. The air between us was thick, suffocating, as though the silence itself were a barrier we couldn't cross. Finally, she spoke, her words so flat, so emotionless, it was as though she were talking to a stranger. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her voice cold and detached. "I had to do this. I had no choice." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at her, to shake her, to force her to see what she had done, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, tangled with grief and rage. I couldn't make sense of it. She had been my daughter, the girl who had fought so hard, who had worked so tirelessly to break free from her own limitations, had become a stranger, a killer. But the truth was, I didn't know her anymore. I didn't know what had broken inside of her, what had twisted her into someone capable of such violence. I had spent years trying to protect her, trying to understand her, but in the end, I had failed. I had failed to see the darkness growing in her, the quiet rage that had been eating away at her from inside. I took one last look at her, my daughter standing there as if nothing had changed, and then I turned away. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't look at the girl who had once been my pride and joy, who had fought so hard to overcome the challenges life had thrown at her, and see her like this. The police came, the questions began, the weight of the tragedy pressing down on me, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered anymore. Emily was gone. Karen was lost, and I was left standing in the ruins of a family that had once been whole. I couldn't even bring myself to speak. What words were there to say? How could I explain this to anyone? How could I ever explain to the world how a mother's love could be turned into this nightmare? How a father could watch his daughter become a monster before his very eyes? The only thing I knew for certain was this: Karen had made her choice, and whatever was left of my daughter was gone. The world I had known had crumbled, and all that was left in its wake was an empty, aching void. As the days passed and the investigation dragged on, I tried to piece together what had happened, tried to make sense of Karen's transformation, but the answers remained elusive. Was she always this way? Had we missed the signs? Or had someone pushed her too far? But the truth was, I would never know. And as I sat in the empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of memories that now felt like lies, I realized that there would be no closure for me. There would be no understanding. There would only be the quiet, aching emptiness of what was lost, a loss that could never be filled. Karen had shattered everything, and there was no way to put it back together. As I sit here, the weight of what happened presses down on me like 1,000 bricks. Karen is gone, taken away by the police, her face unreadable as she was escorted out of the house. But the questions still linger. The questions that refuse to be answered. What drove her to this point? What twisted piece of her heart had been shattered beyond repair? Was it the world that failed her? Was it us? Or was it something darker, something inside her, something buried deep that we never saw? I can't help but wonder, what if this was always going to happen? What if all along we were blind to the signs, the warning shots that were right in front of us? And as I look at the empty house, at the silence that now fills every room, I realize that I may never understand the true extent of her darkness. But one thing is certain: Karen's actions won't be the last of this story. The question isn't what we missed, it's what comes next. And in the end, will we ever be free from the ghost of what she's become? If you've been as shocked and disturbed by Karen's story as we have, then you need to subscribe to the HOA stories and stay tuned for more real-life horrors that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter in this chilling saga. What drives someone to betray the ones they love? Find out as we dive deeper into the twisted stories that the world often ignores. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know what you think about Karen's shocking turn. The story isn't over, and neither is the mystery.